Imagine being the most successful athlete in North American sports history. Like,
Oh,
you have won 11 championships in 13 years.
right.
You are the undisputed cornerstone of a massive sports dynasty. And yet, your relationship with the home city you brought all that unprecedented glory to is so completely broken, so just entirely toxic, that when it's finally time to raise your number to the rafters, you demand that your jersey be retired in an empty, deserted arena.
It's just a staggering contradiction to try and wrap your head around. You
Yeah.
have the ultimate winner on the court, a man who literally defined team success, experiencing what is arguably the ultimate alienation off the court. We like to think of sports as this great social unifier, but this story completely shatters that illusion.
It really does. And welcome to this deep dive, by the way, because to understand the man who demanded that empty arena, you have to look at the immense pressure cooker he lived inside of. Today, we are exploring the life, the unprecedented legacy, and the really intense internal and external battles of basketball legend Bill Russell.
Yeah, using an extensive biographical source on his life, we're looking way beyond the box scores today.
Right, we're going to find out what actually drove the ultimate winner, what his brilliance cost him, and, how he literally changed the geometry of a sport while fighting a bitter war against the very city he played for.
Because Russell wasn't just a basketball player. I mean, he was a pioneer. He completely revolutionized how the game was played defensively from a mechanical standpoint.
Yes.
But simultaneously, he was fighting a lifelong, deeply personal battle against racism. You simply cannot understand his athletic achievements without understanding the social weight he was carrying on his shoulders every single night.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to figure out how a man builds that kind of psychological armor, you have to go back to how he was forged in the first place.
Right.
Put yourself in 1934 in the deeply segregated town of West Monroe, Louisiana. The sources detail some incredibly harrowing foundational experiences for his family.
They really do.
In one instance, his father was at a gas station, and after being refused service, he tried to leave to find another station, and the attendant actually stuck a shotgun directly in his face.
Just horrifying.
Yeah, threatening to kill him if he didn't stay and wait for all the white customers to be served first.
It is terrifying.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just his father facing that daily threat. In another incident detailed in the text, his mother was walking outside wearing a nice fancy dress.
Right.
And a white police officer accosted her on the street and ordered her to go home and take off what he called white woman's clothing.
Oh my God.
I know, these aren't just historical footnotes, These are the daily traumatic realities of Russell's childhood. His family eventually moved to Oakland, California, to try and escape the overt daily bigotry of the Jim Crow South, though they ended up falling into poverty and living in public housing projects.
Right, and out of that brutal environment, his illiterate grandfather, a man who had literally, physically stood up to the Ku Klux Klan to build a schoolhouse for black children, passed down a motto.
Yeah, this is so important.
It became the ultimate psychological anchor for Russell. His grandfather told him, a man has to draw a line inside himself that he won't allow any man to cross.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that single quote is the key to decoding Bill Russell's entire public persona. That motto basically became his lifelong armor.
Wow.
Yeah, Russell internalized it and adapted it to say, if you disrespect that line, you disrespect me. It explains exactly why he absolutely refused to play the role of the smiling, compliant, grateful athlete that the era often demanded of black men.
Yeah, he never permitted himself to be a victim. That line was his fundamental dignity, and he guarded it fiercely against everyone.
Exactly.
Which makes his rise even more fascinating, because with all that internal fire, Russell wasn't some natural basketball prodigy right out of the gate. He was actually cut from his junior high team because he just didn't understand the game.
Right.
And then as a freshman in high school, he was nearly cut again.
Which is almost impossible to imagine for a guy who became an 11-time champion.
Huh.
But his high school coach, a man named George Powles, saw his raw athletic potential, his unusually large hands, his jumping ability, and he encouraged him.
Yeah.
And critically, the sources note that Powles offered him warm, genuine words of reassurance. For a young kid whose previous experiences with white authority figures were largely traumatic and threatening, that simple encouragement was incredibly pivotal.
Wait, I have to push back on this image of the natural athlete who just suddenly learned to jump higher than everyone else.
Okay.
So the greatest champion ever couldn't even make his junior high team. It sounds like he wasn't born a basketball genius. He had to literally engineer himself into one.
Hmm.
Was his legendary defense really just raw athleticism, or was it a calculated science?
Oh, it was absolutely a meticulous science. Russell didn't just outjump his opponents, he outthought them. The text describes how he became almost obsessively analytical. Yeah, he would literally read Dell Sports magazines and study the photos to memorize other players' footwork. He wanted to know which foot a specific player moved first on a specific play, and he would practice defending against the exact mechanical moves in front of a mirror at night.
He was running defensive simulations in his bedroom.
Exactly. He treated basketball like physics. And in doing so, he invented a completely new way to play. You have to understand that the standard coaching advice in the 1950s was that defenders had to stay flat-footed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the logic was that if you leave your feet, you can't react to a ball handler's next move. Russell ignored that completely. He started jumping to make defensive plays and block shots.
Wow.
He was initially reprimanded by coaches for it, but he stuck with it. He turned defense from a static reactive position into an active airborne weapon.
And that airborne weapon got him a scholarship to the University of San Francisco, where he absolutely dominated. I mean, he led USF to 55 straight wins and 2 consecutive NCAA titles. And I want to pause here because he was so dominant that he literally forced the NCAA to rewrite the rule book.
He did.
They had to widen the lane, and they instituted the basket interference rules specifically to stop him. For anyone who doesn't speak fluent basketball, can you explain what those rules actually mean and why they changed them?
Of course. So the lane is that painted rectangular area right in front of the basket. Players are only allowed to stand in it for a few seconds at a time. By widening that rectangle, the NCAA essentially forced big men like Russell to stand much further away from the hoop to avoid a penalty. They were trying to physically distance him from the basket.
And basket interference.
Right. So before Russell, the logic of basketball was entirely gravity-based. Once a player shot the ball and it was coming down toward the rim, you just waited to see if it went in.
Okay.
But Russell was so tall and so athletic, he would just leap up and pluck the ball right out of the sky, right above the rim.
That's crazy.
It broke the fundamental mechanics of the game as they knew it. So they had to invent basket interference to make it illegal to touch the ball when it was in the cylinder above the hoop.
He literally changed the actual geometry of the sport, and he didn't even limit his dominance to basketball. While at USF, he was also a world-class high jumper.
Yes, he was.
In 1956, he tied Charlie Dumas, the guy who went on to win gold at the 1956 Olympics. Russell later said he could have gone to the 1956 Olympics for track and field instead, but back then you could only pick one sport, so he went with basketball.
And he did go to the 1956 Olympics for basketball, captaining the U.S. team to a gold medal. But his entry into the professional ranks is where the modern NBA really begins. And it starts with one of the most bizarre draft day heists in sports history.
Oh, the 1956 draft. Okay, so I read a rumor in the sources about this that sounded like a total myth.
It sounds completely made up.
Supposedly, the Boston Celtics coach, Red Auerbach, desperately wants Russell. But the Celtics pick too late in the draft. The Rochester Royals have the first pick. The rumor is that the Celtics owner, Walter A. Brown, used the ice capades to bribe the Royals. Like, how on earth does figure skating get Bill Russell to Boston?
It sounds completely absurd, but Auerbach claimed it was entirely true. So Walter A. Brown also happened to be the president of the Boston Garden and had immense influence over arena bookings.
Okay.
The owner of the Rochester Royals, Les Harrison, needed profitable events for his own arena. So Brown allegedly promised Harrison guaranteed highly lucrative performances of the ice capades in Rochester on the condition that the Royals pass on drafting Bill Russell.
That is unbelievable. So they pass on him for an ice show.
They do, but Auerbach still needed the second overall pick from the St. Louis Hawks to actually draft him. To get it, Auerbach traded Ed McCauley, who was a 6-time All-Star, and a promising player named Cliff Hagan. Think about that. Auerbach gave up proven, elite scorers for a rookie center who was known almost entirely for his defense.
Which had to seem completely crazy at the time, right? I mean, the 1950s NBA was all about offense.
It was completely unorthodox. Defense was basically an afterthought. But Auerbach had a distinct vision. He realized that to build a true dynasty, he needed a defensive anchor. What's fascinating here is how quickly Russell validated that massive gamble. He brought what became known as the Hey Bill defense to Boston.
Okay, I love the name, but mechanically, how did the Hey Bill defense work? Because if he's suddenly running over to block someone else's guy, isn't he leaving his own man completely wide open? Like, how does that not just result in easy points for the other team?
That's where his unparalleled recovery speed comes in. Because Russell was so fast, if any Celtic defender got beat by their man on the perimeter, they would just yell, "Hey, Bill."
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and Russell would instantly sprint over, double-team the opponent, and block the shot. The press actually started calling these block shots Wilson burgers because he'd aggressively shove the Wilson brand basketballs right back into the shooters' faces.
Wilson burgers, I love that.
But to answer your question, he was so quick that after blocking the shot, he could recover back to his own man before the opponent even had time to find the open guy and pass it.
So he's essentially guarding two people at once.
Exactly. It allowed the rest of the Celtics to play incredibly aggressive, high-risk perimeter defense because they knew Russell was guarding the vault behind them. And here's where we get a massive tactical insight from the sources. Russell didn't just block shots to intimidate people.
Right.
He fundamentally authored the psychology of the opposing team.
How so?
While other big men would just swat the ball out of bounds into the third row to look tough. But that just stops play and gives the ball right back to the offense.
Right.
Russell engineered his blocks. He would intentionally tip the ball lightly to his own teammates, like Bob Cousy, immediately sparking a fast break. He turned a defensive stop into an instant offensive weapon.
That is brilliant. But carrying that kind of physical and psychological burden took a horrifying toll on him. To humanize this legend for a second, the sources mention he had what was described as a neurotic need to win. The pressure he put on himself was so immense that he would regularly vomit in the locker room before games.
Yeah, that's true.
It happened so consistently that his teammates actually viewed it as a necessary ritual. John Havlicek said they would grin when they heard him throwing up because it meant Russell was keyed up. If they didn't hear him getting sick, they panicked, thinking they were going to lose.
It highlights the extreme, visceral reality of his mindset. He told an interviewer that to play at his defensive level, he had to enter a state of mind that was almost like a controlled rage, where absolutely nothing outside the borders of the court existed.
Wow.
He was fundamentally driven by the need to win the game, not by padding his own personal statistics. And that brings us to the ultimate contrast of his era, his rivalry with Wilt Chamberlain.
The ultimate clash of titans. Wilt Chamberlain comes into the league, and he is a physical anomaly unlike anything the NBA had ever seen.
What's fascinating here is how this rivalry represented two completely different philosophies of basketball. Chamberlain was a pure statistical anomaly. We are talking about a guy who averaged 50.4 points per game in a single season.
That's just insane.
He once grabbed 55 rebounds in a single game, and that was against Bill Russell. But while Chamberlain had the jaw-dropping individual numbers, Russell had the psychological edge and the championship rings.
It's the ultimate stats versus rings debate. Chamberlain's own coach literally admitted to the press, "We don't fear the Celtics without Bill Russell. He's the guy who whipped us psychologically."
Yeah.
Russell intentionally kept his own offensive output low, averaging around 15 points a game throughout his career, because he understood his team needed his energy focused entirely on defense and rebounding. He played to elevate the four guys around him.
And that unparalleled ability to lead a team inevitably led to his next massive milestone. Let's move to 1966. Red Auerbach decides to retire after winning 8 straight championships. He offers a head coaching job to a few former players. They all say no. And eventually, the job goes to Russell. He is named a player coach.
Which makes him the first black head coach in major North American sports history. But from a human resources perspective, that transition had to be incredibly awkward. Put yourself in Russell's shoes for a second. Imagine your boss steps down today, and tomorrow you are suddenly in charge of managing your former drinking buddies. How do you handle that dynamic?
With absolute, uncompromising bluntness.
Really?
Yeah, the text says Russell sat his teammates down and told them he intended to cut all personal ties with them immediately. He had to seamlessly transition from being their peer in the locker room to being their ultimate superior. He demanded respect for his authority, period. He stated clearly to the press that he wasn't offered the job because he was black, but because Auerbach figured he could win.
And his leadership was tested almost immediately in ways that went far, far beyond basketball. The source text highlights 1968 as a profound moment. It's the Eastern Division Finals against Chamberlain's Philadelphia 76ers. The 76ers are the favorites. And then, on April 4th, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated.
It was an unimaginable national tragedy that deeply shook both teams. You have to remember, 8 of the 10 starting players on the floor for the Celtics and 76ers were black.
Right.
There were widespread calls to cancel the series entirely out of respect and mourning. They ended up playing Game 1 the very next day, and observers described it as a game completely devoid of emotion. The players were in shock. Philadelphia took a 3-1 series lead, and prior to this moment, no team in NBA history had ever come back from a 3-1 deficit.
But Russell somehow rallies his team through that collective grief. They win Game 5, they win Game 6. And then in Game 7 in Philadelphia, Russell completely shuts Chamberlain down in the second half, limiting him to just 2 shot attempts. Now, earlier we talked about Chamberlain's physical dominance. How on earth does an exhausted Bill Russell limit a guy who can score 50 points a night to just 2 shots in the most important half of the season?
It was a masterclass in tactical exhaustion. Russell couldn't outmuscle Wilt Chamberlain. Nobody could. So he outworked him. Mechanically, Russell spent the entire game fronting Chamberlain, meaning he wrestled his way to stand in front of Wilt to deny the guards from even passing him the ball in the first place.
Oh, wow.
He made Wilt fight for every single inch of positioning. By the second half, he had essentially used his superior cardiovascular stamina to drain Chamberlain's legs. Russell makes clutch plays in the final seconds, they win the game, and they go on to win the 1968 NBA Finals.
For that incredible feat of leadership under unimaginable grief and pressure, Russell was named Sports Illustrated's Sportsman of the Year. But we have to pivot here to the deeply troubling reality of what Russell was experiencing back home. Because while he was winning championships for Boston and making history as a coach, the city of Boston was absolutely not a safe haven for him.
Not at all. The dark side of this story is horrifying, and its vital context. Despite bringing unparalleled historic glory to the city, Russell faced intense, vicious, daily racism from Boston fans. At the absolute apex of this hostility, vandals actually broke into his family home in Reading, Massachusetts while he was away.
It's so messed up.
They covered the walls with racist graffiti, they smashed his hard-earned trophies, and they actually defecated in his bed.
It is genuinely vile. And it forces us to look at Russell's reaction, which was to draw that line his grandfather taught him about. He was totally uncompromising. He refused to sign autographs for fans. He publicly called Boston a flea market of racism. He made a very distinct mental separation to survive. He stated famously that he played for the Celtics, not for Boston.
Exactly. He views the Celtics organization, specifically Red Auerbach and owner Walter Brown, as a progressive sanctuary. The sources note the Celtics were the first team to draft a black player, the first to start 5 black players, and the first to hire a black head coach.
Right.
He felt deeply respected inside the walls of that locker room. But the minute he stepped outside into the city, he felt under siege. The FBI even kept a file on him, labeling him an arrogant Negro simply because he wouldn't sign autographs and didn't smile in command.
He was also deeply active in the civil rights movement, which drew ire. He stood with Muhammad Ali at the Cleveland Summit. He marched. He took public stances. He refused to play the submissive role that many white fans demanded of a black athlete in that era. He was fiercely guarding his dignity.
Which brings us perfectly to his final masterpiece on the court, the 1969 Finals. This is the end of the line. Set the scene. Russell is 35 years old.
Okay.
He's exhausted from years of carrying the franchise and the social weight of the era. He's going through a difficult divorce. He's 15 pounds overweight. The Celtics are aging rapidly. They barely stumble into the playoffs as a 4th seed. And waiting for them in the finals is a Los Angeles Lakers super team featuring Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West, and Elgin Baylor.
The Lakers were incredibly heavy favorites. The series goes to a grueling Game 7 in Los Angeles. And the Lakers owner, Jack Kent Cooke, makes a monumental, arrogant error in judgment.
Well, big mistake.
He is so confident of victory that before the game even starts, he places leaflets on all the seats in the arena detailing the proceedings of the Lakers' victory ceremony, complete with plans for balloons falling from the ceiling.
You never, ever give Bill Russell that kind of bulletin board material. Russell somehow gets his hands on a copy of this leaflet before tip-off. He uses it as the ultimate psychological fuel. He goes into the locker room and tells his exhausted team that they need to play a relentless running game tonight. He tells them it's not the better team that will win, it's the more determined team.
Okay, tactically though, why a running game? If his team is older and heavier, shouldn't they be trying to slow the game down to save their legs?
You would think so.
Yeah.
But Russell recognized that while the Lakers had more sheer talent and size, they were also older and less cohesive as a unit. But pushing the pace relentlessly, forcing fast breaks on every single possession, Russell decided to weaponize exhaustion.
Wow.
Yeah, he gambled that his team's sheer willpower and conditioning could break the Lakers' spirit late in the game. He turned it from a game of skill into a pure contest of endurance.
And it works. They pull off the massive upset, holding on to win 108 to 106. Russell wins his 11th championship in 13 years, and then he just completely vanishes.
It was an incredibly abrupt, shocking exit. Days after the win, while 30,000 fans are cheering the team at a rally in Boston, Russell isn't even there. He officially retires and completely severs ties with the Celtics organization. He blindsided Auerbach. And, to add insult to injury for the Boston fans, he sold his exclusive retirement story to Sports Illustrated for $10,000. The city felt utterly betrayed.
He also had a massive falling out with Wilt Chamberlain immediately after that Game 7. Wilt had injured his knee and taken himself out of the game in the final minutes. Afterward, a reporter overheard Russell saying Wilt copped out of the game.
Yeah.
Wilt was livid, viewing Russell as a backstabber who was questioning his heart. That simple misunderstanding shattered their relationship, and the two men didn't speak to each other for over 20 years.
It was a very bitter, isolated end to his playing days. The text notes he struggled as a coach for Seattle and Sacramento later on. He ran into financial trouble with a rubber plantation in Liberia and a restaurant in Boston. He essentially lived as a near recluse in Washington state for a long time.
Yeah.
But the story doesn't end there in isolation. The later years brought profound, necessary healing.
Yes, the reconciliation phase of his life is beautiful. He eventually met with Chamberlain privately. He personally apologized for the comments, and they fully restored their deep friendship before Chamberlain passed away in 1999. And then there's the thawing of the ice with the city of Boston itself.
Remember that empty arena we talked about at the very beginning? When his number 6 was officially retired by the Celtics in 1972, Russell point-blank refused to attend a public ceremony. He demanded it be done in an empty Boston garden with only a few people present. He was still so wounded that he wouldn't even attend his own Hall of Fame induction in 1975.
But time passes. In 1995, the Celtics move to a new arena, the Fleet Center. They reach out and tell him they want to re-retire his jersey, but this time in front of a sellout crowd. And Russell, who had held on to that deep hurt for decades, finally agrees. In 1999, they hold the ceremony. His great rival, Wilt Chamberlain, is there supporting him. The Boston crowd gives Russell a massive, deafening, prolonged standing ovation. And all that emotion finally breaks through, bringing Bill Russell to tears.
He took the microphone and actually thanked the crowd for allowing him to be a part of their lives. It was an incredibly poignant moment of closure for a relationship that had been so fraught with pain, racism, and misunderstanding. And from that moment on, his legacy just continued to grow and be properly recognized.
The accolades in his later life are immense. He receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2011. The West Coast Conference institutes the Russell Rule, which mandates diverse hiring pools for coaching and administrative jobs. And shortly after his death in 2022, at the age of 88, the NBA does something it has never done for anyone else. They retire his number 6 jersey league-wide.
Joining only Jackie Robinson in baseball and Wayne Gretzky in hockey as the only athletes in North American sports to receive that honor. His footprint on the mechanics of the game and on American culture itself is just immeasurable.
So we've unpacked the 11 rings, we've talked about how he engineered a new geometry for basketball defense, and we've seen how he carried the immense daily weight of the civil rights movement on his shoulders while playing at the highest level. So what does this all mean for us today?
If we connect all these threads, I think Bill Russell's story is the ultimate masterclass in defining your own worth. He absolutely refused to let the crowd or society dictate his value. Whether they were cheering him for winning a championship or booing him and vandalizing his home, he kept that internal boundary perfectly intact.
Yeah, that line.
He played on his own terms. He drew that line his grandfather taught him about, and he never let anyone cross it. He proved that you can be the ultimate, selfless team player on the court while remaining fiercely, uncompromisingly, your own individual off of it.
Which leaves me with a thought I really can't shake. We live in an era right now of highly curated athlete public relations. Everything is spin-doctored, carefully managed by agencies for maximum brand value on 24/7 social media. Everyone wants to be liked. Could a sports superstar today even survive being as unapologetically raw, as uncompromising, and as socially defiant as Bill Russell was in the 1960s?
This raises an important question about what we really want from our icons. We often want our heroes to be flawless, friendly, and easily digestible. But Russell's life shows us that real progress, both in sports and in society, usually requires someone willing to be deeply uncomfortable and fiercely unliked.
It really makes you appreciate the immense cost of his greatness. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex, brilliant life of Bill Russell. There are always more incredible stories waiting in the sources to uncover. But for now, we'll leave you with that lingering image, a man who demanded his jersey be raised in a cold, empty arena, only to eventually return, decades later, to fill it with tears of reconciliation.